Hey, what's going on? Thanks for tuning in to Forward Obsessed. I'm super pumped to have and introduce my newest guest, which is Ned. I always forget your last name.
Wallroth.
Yeah, Ned Wallroth, founding partner of Amalgam, really awesome experiential branding, really future-driven agency in terms of where the agency's going. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
So, dude, I want to talk to you about so much stuff, but I guess the biggest question I'd ask is, can you tell the audience a little bit about just your journey, your background? I'd love to just kind of establish for them, like, we all know you're a badass, but how'd you get there?
Yeah, so first started actually, fell in love with advertising with Absolute vodka ads. I just love that you could tell a story just through just some visuals, not much words at all. As a very visual person, that was always really important for me. And then Super Bowl spots, just loved it. Like, because most stuff out there is just such crap, so it was nice to have beautiful, really cool, like, not even in high production, but just like the quality of the idea, right? So from there, I got into the brand side of it right out of school. I was working at a branding agency, did a lot of work there, and really felt like that was kind of the core. It's like the centerpiece of the spoke, right? So I've always focused on that side of it. And my father was a strategy consultant. So he was always like, look, ideas are great, but they're fluffy unless they can really, you know, they call it like the soak test, right? Yeah. Like if it still is an idea later on, then that's great. So focusing on how to kind of like bridge the gap between that. And so really what Amalgam is how to have the smallest amount of people involved to save money, time, and energy, and work on the most selective stuff that you want to, right? So it also centered from the idea of there's really been like never the two shall meet with consulting and really like strategy consulting in terms of what are you actually trying to do as a business, and brand and advertising, right? So trying to fill the two of them together, and then you've got code, you know, video, all these different things that are all an amalgamation, right? So the idea is how do we build it together? It's the glue or the fascia between the muscles is what we try to be.
That's awesome. So and the name sort of speaks for itself, right? In a lot of ways. So talk to us about, I mean, obviously only what you feel comfortable talking about, but what are some of the things that you guys are doing right now? Like, you know, who are you doing it for? Just at a big picture level, like, what do you think 2019 is going to look like for you? Yeah,
so 2019's been great right out of the, it's been pretty nuts. We've been doing a lot of work in spirits.
Awesome.
Working on a really cool campaign with Absolute for a new product of theirs, and Untuck It, the shirt company, So they're so great. They've got something very distinctive, and it's like, how do we have a more clever way of showcasing it and having it resonate with people, right? Working with Glenlivet.
Nice.
The Glenlivet is, you know, an old stodgy brand. That's a lot of the things that we focus on, is taking something that worked a long time ago and then being able to find a way to talk about it in a new and relevant way that really anchors on what was so great about it back in the day, right? So we also do a lot of work with startups, just constantly wanting to know, you know, new things, right? Because sometimes that's the most fun things to work on. If something's already been done, you're kind of doing more production work, right? So a lot of startup work. We're working on a clip actually that helps women that suffer from morning sickness.
Wow.
Which as an idea has more legs because there's so many different things. I mean, you know, you're hungover, you're, you know, congestion issues, things like that. And it's a clip that goes into your nose that's non-invasive.
That's awesome.
And it's a diffusing system. So things like that. It's basically anything that we think can be disrupted or clear up an idea, right? So building something from the ground up, changing it so that it's a little bit easier to point out distinction, or expressing it in a really clever way. That's what we focus mostly on.
Awesome, I love that. And one of the things that you and I were talking about is, I want to kind of go back just a second to something that you said, that whole soak test, right? Which is, we're a firm believer at Digital Surgeons that not every strategy is creative, but everything that's creative is strategic, right? Because it has to be. And I think that a lot of times today, I'm sure you'd agree, just based on our backgrounds, it's a lot of creative directors, designers, developers, they really focus on the thing and not necessarily the person or not necessarily the outcome, right? So I think that, you know, one of the things that you and I connected on, you know, initially was just, we see the world really differently in terms of how people go out and solve their creative problems, right? So, you know, you're a small boutique team. I know we're in the same kind of boat, and nowadays it's more about like resource sharing and thinking sharing and like being less of that kind of traditional stodgy AOR, right? So I want to talk to you about just First and foremost, what do you think makes a great idea? So you and me, I know we're both framework guys, right? It's like when we've got someone watching this who's maybe they're on the come up, maybe they're reimagining themselves. How do we help tell our audience a little bit about what makes a great idea and the recipe for great ideas?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it really stems from passion, right? Okay. Like if people care about it, it's always going to be something that's interesting. So if there's a problem or an opportunity, that's generally when that's the time.
Okay.
Right? So, whether it's the smallest product on the planet or the biggest one, it's just how are you going to be able to tell that story in a way that everyone's going to be able to have it resonate, right? And there's so many different ways of thinking. So how do you take that idea and then expand upon it so everyone that's intended to hear about it or experience it does?
When Amalgam looks at an idea, it says, which of these ideas is quality?
Sure.
What is that litmus test for Ned?
I think it really stems around momentum, right? Okay. So I like to say, like, you make your own momentum. It's either something you do or you don't do. So you have a conscious decision where you have all these choices in life, and there's so many things going on. You've got your phones, hit up, all that stuff. Thank God they're both over there so we can actually pay attention, right? So it's like, if you make your own momentum. If something hits you, then it hits you. If it doesn't, it doesn't, right? And there's moments in time where it's like a controlled experiment. Depending upon what else was there, it either is going to hit you or isn't going to hit you. Yeah. So you kind of tap into that, and it's basically like, okay, what resonates, right? And a lot of it, I think, too, comes from just thinking about things in a clear way where you don't think about things about like what other people are thinking, right? Yeah. So, I like to think that a lot of the best ideas come from just failing, right? So if you fail, you're thinking, and you're still trying to reinvent what it is you're trying to do. Right. And a lot of times, like, the best ideas come from the worst ideas. And I think sometimes the same thing with just meeting people. You have your preconceived notion of somebody, you never know, they could become your best friend, and the first time you meet them, you're like, that person's a douche, right? Like, not your person. So that idea of just fail fast and smart and quick to find what it is that's gonna have that moment of like, oh, that clarity, like, oh, that's what we're trying to do, that's why I like that, and that's where that momentum hits.
Yeah, speaking of momentum, as branding experts, and we both have worked on some really incredible brands that need no sort of introduction. I want to talk about Weight Watchers and Dunkin' Donuts, right? Because the amount of audience people that have been reaching out to the team here and saying, hey, I know that you've got Ned coming on the show, like, can you guys talk about Weight Watchers and Dunkin' Donuts, like what they did? Obviously, MasterCard's a big one recently. They just dropped the name, just the logo, two fucking circles. How awesome is that, right? Tell me about like your perspective on what do you think motivated, I mean, just for the audience, I think we know inside baseball, but what do you think motivated those two rebrands? And how do you think that they're occurring in the world from that work that they did? Yeah,
I mean, so Dunkin' first, right? You think about Domino's, right? Because Domino's is so much more than just pizza, right? Same thing, where, I mean, Boston born and bred, right? Like, people aren't eating the donuts, it's the coffee, right? So how do you take that? People are still eating a lot of the donuts, but their bread and butter is so many more things, right? So from that, just being able to take a chance to say, all right, we're gonna do this. I know, they've been thinking about it obviously for a really long time. Sometimes I think it just takes that leap of faith or a change, which sometimes can be a bummer, right? Where it's a change in AOR where you're like, the other AOR was doing great. It's just a new CMO coming in.
Yeah.
Who knows what the case could be. But with Dunkin', I think it made a lot of sense. I thought it was really interesting from the branding standpoint, using who they did.
Yeah.
He's been touching everything. Budweiser. I mean, it's like,
totally. Absolutely.
And they killed it. I think they did a really great job. And the simplification of everything, I mean, people like to simplify, like you're talking about MasterCard.
Yeah.
It's great. If you can stand for something, and from an iconographic standpoint, just be that, then you've won the battle, right? People already know who you are. And it's like, concretely, you don't even need to say MasterCard, right? Same thing. You don't need to say donuts anymore, right? So I love that, and I love the identity system. I love that they've also been playing around with just different ways of expressing. American Runs on Dunkin' was brilliant, right? And it's super smart, especially as they move across. Like now they're out in California, there's such a following there, right? But they've done more than just what they are, and so they need to express it in new ways. So I don't know if you've seen the new ads.
I have, And so actually, so funny story, right? So, and the audience will appreciate this because I got a lot of data scientist friends and data geeks, and part of one of the things we've got Ned here to do, sort of when we hit the stop button on this camera, is I want to show Ned the data platform that we're working on and how it's garnering insights for our clients. So one of my old clients actually was one of the lead brand strategists that worked on America Runs on Dunkin. So there's a lot of people that have taken or gotten credit for it.
Sure.
I'm not going to name him because I don't want to make him ousted, but he was a big proponent to creating that. And one of the things that was interesting is when this first happened, I reached out to him to ask his perspective. And one of the things that we got into a very interesting discussion around was just colloquial use of brands and how when brands listen, they can really get it. So I love Dunkin' Donuts, the simplification of just going back to Dunkin' and that sort of idea of D&D and Dunkin'. And for me, what I think is interesting is nowadays we do a ton, as digital consultancy, we do a ton with social listening, psychology, and all the stuff where we take real people and data from machines, put them together. What I think is interesting was when you look at that strategy work, there were so many modern day ways to get insights where people are just saying, I'm going to Dunkin', or I'm going to D&D, do you want something?
Right.
So I think even just the language that people are using.
Well, it's like listening to your customers properly, right? Totally. I mean, you look at a company like Dunkin' where they're owned by so many mom and pops, right? And regionally and otherwise. So it's really cool to see them listen properly and just, understand that it's like, okay, we do need to change, we do need to evolve, and how are we going to do that, and how are we going to simplify? But by simplifying, you're getting closer to what your core of what you are, strategically, right?
I totally agree. So, I struggle with the Weight Watchers one personally. I reached out to some friends that I know that are either inside the four walls or outside, and I'm struggling with that one because I don't understand the tie back. So I'd love your thoughts on outside of we want to drop the association with weight because of the shame issues and those kinds of things.
Sure.
Working as a consumer, but not working on that business or having a deeper understanding, I sort of feel like the translation, the equities of that brand feel like they're not necessarily carrying over. So I'd love your thoughts on just what that WW, how do you think that it will actually get back to a place that matters?
I think this is more, it's like what resonates as a brand and what resonates visually, right? So visually, the identity system definitely evolved, and I think it's smart, right? Even down to just sort of the tonality of what they're saying and how they're saying it, but what they're saying doesn't necessarily resonate with me as a dude that needs to watch my weight, right? So
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, right. The point system, all that. I think that there's ways of saying it in a more clever way, or more that will resonate with a larger audience. That said, I mean, Oprah's the one behind it, right? Her voice rather.
Right.
I mean, that's huge, and she having transformed her body multiple times and being a success story, I think is really smart. But I agree with you. I think there's something there that's almost like when the identity system kind of goes beyond and
it's a stretch, right?
Yeah, well, and it's so maybe it needs to be stretched more from a strategic standpoint.
Yeah, I agree, and I think for me, this is where I want
to you and I should totally be now I'm on that,
right, exactly, yeah. It's like, oh, dude, are you on that WW app?
No, we're point systeming it today.
We're not drinking beer in our mugs. I bet you wish you knew it was in there. But for me, I step back and I think, I go back in time to when I was an art director, right? Before I had my own shop and that sort of thing, and I get all these briefs, and sometimes they were great, sometimes more often than not, the insight was we want to build brand awareness, right? Which is that's not an insight, that's a brief. So and I'm making some jokes. Sorry, big agency friends that don't do it right, but you can't all be awesome. But for me as an art director, I used to overthink things that didn't matter, right? I used to focus on, a piece of type that had no real expressive significance in the brand. So I think one of the things that I've learned to appreciate, and I want to just put this out there for the audience, is understanding the intention of the design. Design, if you're just creating things for the sake of creating things that aren't going to resonate, you're an artist, and the world needs more artists, right? But as designers and strategists and business builders, I think what you and I can share with this audience here is, how do you really design for intention? How do you really design for the user? So for an up-and-coming designer that's becoming a creative director, or maybe a middle marketer becoming more on the senior side, what are some things that you would put out there, Ned, that you think are actionable takeaways for how to level that thinking up? Yeah,
I think it all stems around what you're passionate about, right? You can't fake it. If it's something you're into it. And sometimes you can see it from a type standpoint. You can say, not feeling it, but
it should not be a humanist typeface for that particular brand because it's
and that's, you kind of toggle back and forth, and you brought up data earlier, right? Where it's the most beautiful thing in the world that doesn't get shown anywhere or doesn't resonate with somebody, doesn't matter, right? But the most beautiful idea that botched never really resonates because people are just like, what is that? I don't know what that was.
Trying too hard, yeah.
Right, so I think the way to kind of assess that, no matter what, if you're 10 years old and you're trying to get into this, or you're somebody who's tried and true, but it's kind of lost the game on the digital side. It really all stems back to, what resonates, but also like, what are you passionate about? Because if there's passion there, then there's that burn. And if there's that, then okay, something about this is going to resonate with me. Yeah. And so chances are other people like me are going to have the same thing, right? Yeah. So I think that's the core.
I love that.
Right?
So what do you think, 2019, we're going to see a lot more rebrands. There's obviously, the trend now is like, let's rebrand. Question for you is, what do you think the future of rebranding looks like in terms of how brands are going to go about executing that? And where do you think that Digital Surgeons and Amalgam can add real unique value in that transferring business model?
Yeah, so first, I was having a conversation with an advisor of ours, Rob Wallace he grew Wallace Church. It's one of the most prolific branding agencies. He was talking about, back in the day when he was working on it, there were so few branding agencies, right? And now there's one on every block. There's like 300 in one small, borough.
Right? We have 5 in our co-working space.
Right. Like everyone loves to, which is great, but it's sort of like, okay, how do you stand out then?
Yeah.
And so if all we're trying to do is make brands distinctive and then showcase what that is strategically or visually or digitizing it or otherwise, it's like, okay, how is that going to change? And I think, if people knew how many agencies there are, branding agencies, it's like everyone pops up here and there, all over the place, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it goes back to that whole thing about like, what is it you're either trying to solve as a problem, or what opportunities are there that you need to talk about things in the proper way. So I think, the future of 19, 20, that's really going to be like, okay, at some point, things go one side and they come back to the other.
Pendulum. Yeah, I talk about the pendulum all the time.
Totally. So we're kind of at that spot where it's like, how many other people, I think people leave and they start their own things is because they are unhappy. People talk a lot about just the industry and how it's broken and things like that. And I think that kind of friction is really good. Yeah. That friction, I think, spawns opportunity and crisis.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? And so without the crisis, you don't really have any reason to reinvent. Yeah. So I think there's sort of like, I look at things from just sort of us as a company and us as a group of companies that work together, and then just from an ecosystematical side, right? Yep. Like, how do we, there's this idea of the ego ideal, right? Yeah. Which is impossible by definition to attain. But as long as you're working towards that, then awesome. Yeah. You're working and you're working smart.
I love that you said that. You talk about Wallace, obviously, one of my mentors and really inspiring co-creation partners is Pat Hanlon, who's done everything from Absolute to every brand in between that. And he's sort of the Y&R, guy who came up with primal branding, right?
Sure.
The big Mad Av guy. And I was talking to him about the future branding. He's got an incredible column online, and we were riffing, and an idea hit me that I want to share with the audience, that I want to share with you, that I think, really it's the reason we're sitting here today, or one of the many, right? Yeah. I think there's this idea of a social contagion and an energy contagion that these brand leaders today need, right? It's not about just relationship. It's about who can bring that thinking, that passion, and play well as a team partner, right? I think that the biggest thing I'm seeing with the best branding agencies that are really starting to rise, like if you're not Pentagram, and everyone knows Pentagram and did the MasterCard thing, right? Yeah. How do we have this idea of smart curation, right? So what I love is for us to be able to sit down as CMO and CEO brand whisperers, right? Sit with that team to assemble the groups, to have no ego about this is going to be driven by the customer, this is going to be driven by the internal person, this is going to be driven by XYZ agency. So I think what you and I have brought to the table is, I think we can walk in and focus on the solution and focus on the outcome. Yeah. And we don't care if someone's doing the logo or the ad campaign or whatever it is. We get to come together, Amalgam, like what you do, in our case, Digital Surgeons, to sort of connect those dots and to really bring together that human emotion. So for me, what I think the future of branding is really an extension of curation. And what I mean by curation is like a museum, right? So a museum, what makes a museum curator, I think, more special than any pop-up art thing that's happening is that it is a bespoke connection and collaboration of the right things, right? So bringing together the agencies and using them differently. I think the future of branding for me, and I don't know if you agree, is how do we break the traditional mold of AOR or project-based work or whatever to be able to create a system or systems that allow everyone to bring the best thinking and the best criteria together without getting into the whose logo is better or who's
because it's a lot of it's like art. It's very subjective.
Yeah.
Right?
Would you agree with that curation idea?
I totally do, and I think part of it is playing well in the sandbox together. But I think also too, it's a lot of companies that do really well from a monetary standpoint. You're beholden to it if you're part of a large conglomerate.
Totally.
Right? Like, oh, that looks cool, and oh, you were working with 501c3, but you didn't hit your numbers. And I think that's where the kind of art versus commerce divide and clash is smart, because it helps in a lot of ways, but it also divides, right? So there are times when you just sort of think, you put your creative hat on and you talk about some of the things that are broken. Sometimes it's by virtue of, oh, I just want to work on this. Yeah. Right? Yep. Developers don't do it as much. They do it, but they're, as a creative, you're like, I need to work on this, and so I'm going to do it no matter what. Yep. And so you undercut yourself or what have you. So there's sort of like hold the line in terms of what things should cost. Yeah. But there's also people are taking on work that they really don't want to. Yeah, I agree. Right? And I think some of the bigs are doing that too, where they just kind of like, all right, wow, we just lost. Got to pay salaries, and you don't, the last thing you want to do is get rid of anybody on your team, right? Yeah, totally. So, I think the ecosystem is broken, and I think that that's actually the best time and opportunity too, to rethink, okay, really what we're supposed to be doing is thinking about, what helps the brand. Yeah. Right? And because we're in service to them. In service to them, and they're in service to the customer, right? So a lot of times the CMO is just like, they've got so many different things, and they're more like CIOs, and they're chief revenue officers too, and chief creatives are all like it depends. It's intermixed, but it's all intermixed, and it's kind of like, okay, how do you put this together, and what's that team look like? Which I think it starts by knocking down the walls, and I think what you and I and our teams can do is break down those walls. And I think you said something about this idea. It's almost like this Venn diagram of art and commerce. Yeah. What I want to do is, for the audience here, is I want you to think about, as a brand, as a marketer, I want you guys to think about the art of commerce, right? So we have this philosophy here. We do a lot of what we call connected commerce initiatives, right? So what we do is, how do we take content and commerce and bring them together, really with that customer in mind, right? So for some of our clients, we're like Sperry, for example, we're helping them with Alexa skills, and like, how does that help with top and middle funnel acquisition, right? So it's not just an e-com initiative, right? It's a brand initiative. But because the way these organizations are structured, you might be watching this going, well, yeah, I have functional silos, or I'm a matrixed organization. This group never talks to this group. I think what I'm saying to you and Ned's saying to you is, it's possible the best brands, the ones that are winning, are doing it. That's where you can bring in partners like us to give you that perspective, to take down some of those walls. But more importantly, right, just as a sort of smart closing thought, I think for us to think about, not me being the smart thought, but us to open this up is, wouldn't it be awesome if we could start asking questions that our customers are asking brands that they can't get the answers to through a social media tweet or whatever, that ultimately results in the brand growing? And I think the problem is that a lot of businesses today, you and I just talked about this like last week or 2 weeks ago, was people play the short game. I think the funny thing about short game versus long game is, I understand that shareholders live in quarter to quarter results. Yeah. But you and I both know America Runs on Dunkin was not a quarter-to-quarter strategy. No. Dunkin is not a quarter-to-quarter strategy, right? Those that play the long game and invest in brand, invest in expression, express in marketing in a smart way, those are the ones that are going to be around 50 years from now. Okay, so look at Converse, perfect example, right? Love like, not ignore the people that you're beholden to, but all right, listen to your customer. You're not a basketball brand back then, right? Yeah. They can become a basketball brand again. They probably will, right? Yeah. This whole idea of, your consumer, if you listen, it's people in music and people in art and creativity. Totally. So it's like, okay, how do we cater to that? Right? Yeah. And so I think beyond that too, there's a digital knowledge portion of it. Absolutely. And there's going to be something else tomorrow. And it's like, break and poke holes into the AOR system, and even the smallest of the smallest, and figure out ways to kind of like build value by doing that. And I think that is actually like, the ecosystem will be a lot better if people are not afraid of other people coming in and taking up their own job. I totally agree. Right? Well, fear. Like, take it from me. Like sure. Make it better. That's the win, right?
No, for
you know,
sure.
so.
I know you've got to catch an airplane soon, so and I see people like waving hands in the background. So, Ned, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us today on Forward Obsessed. I'm really, really excited again for everything we talked about. If there was sort of one last thing that you'd want to leave the audience with for where the future of branding and agency relationships are going, like what would it be?
Voice. Listening, but also the use of voice. I mean, you know,
like Google Home Alexa, or you mean like voice and tone?
Voice and tone and voice and Alexa. So think about, you know, for one, just being pure. So from a voice standpoint, that side of it, but also.
So metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. But I mean, because I think that's where it stems from, right? Most of what we do when we really have impact is by speaking.
Yeah.
Right? So listen from a brand standpoint. Obviously, being able to have digital knowledge come through.
Yeah, of course, and enabled, right?
Yeah, like earlier we were talking about, you know, you've got brands that may look the right way.
Yeah.
If you don't have your digital voice and everything's set up properly, no one can find you.
So I'm going to end this one on a question, which is, I would love for you to think about what is your voice and what's your voice strategy for 2019, whether it be platforms or voice and tone, whatever it is, you know, put it out there for us, you know, comment. Tag somebody that you think could get some value from this conversation. I know Ned and I are going to jump because he's got to get on a plane because he's going to work on some other big, awesome brand that maybe you'll be tuning into this, but he's not going to say it or else he'll break his NDA and that sort of thing. So Ned, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the audience for tuning in to Forward Obsessed, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace. Thanks.